November 20th, 1943. Betio Island, Tarawa Atoll. The Japanese had engineered perfection. Rear Admiral Keiji Shibasaki's forces had transformed a narrow beach approach into the most sophisticated killing field in the Pacific. Concrete bunkers reinforced with steel and coconut logs, interlocking fields of fire calculated down to the inch, artillery pieces zeroed on coordinates that every American landing craft would have to cross. 470 defenders of the 7th Sasebo Special Naval Landing Force waited behind fortifications that had taken 8 months to construct, watching the only route 35 United States Marines could possibly take to reach the Japanese command bunker. Every military manual said the same thing: superior numbers, prepared positions, and overlapping fire zones create unbreakable defensive lines. The attackers need at least 3-to-1 numerical advantage to overcome fortified defenders. The Japanese had studied marine assault tactics through 2 years of Pacific warfare. They knew exactly where 2nd Lieutenant William Dean Hawkins and his scout sniper platoon would advance. They could practically plot the American route on their tactical maps. As the tropical sun climbed higher over the central Pacific, Japanese gunners peered through their reinforced firing slits at the coral approaches, fingers resting on triggers, waiting for the inevitable assault into their mathematically perfect trap. The defensive network was flawless, the firepower overwhelming, the numerical advantage crushing. The Marines were coming anyway, and they were about to rewrite every calculation in Shibasaki's defensive manual. The morning of November 20th broke over Betio Island with the kind of crystalline clarity that made aerial reconnaissance photographers thank whatever gods watched over military intelligence operations. 2nd Lieutenant William Dean Hawkins stood on the deck of the transport ship Zalin, studying the island through field glasses that revealed every detail of the fortifications his scout sniper platoon would soon be required to neutralize. From this distance, barely 3 miles offshore, the Japanese defensive positions looked exactly like what they were: a masterpiece of military engineering designed to slaughter Marines, attempting the obvious approach to Rear Admiral Shibasaki's command complex. The intelligence reports spread across the briefing table told a story in numbers that should have made the mission impossible. 470 Japanese Special Naval Landing Forces, the Empire's equivalent of Marines, had spent 8 months transforming the northern shore of Betio into a fortress specifically designed to repel American amphibious assault. The defensive network included 14 reinforced concrete bunkers, each one positioned to create overlapping fields of fire that would cut down attacking forces before they covered 50 yards of open beach. Every artillery piece on this section of the island had been registered to fire on predetermined coordinates. The Japanese had quite literally measured the killing zones with surveying equipment. Hawkins set down his binoculars and turned to Staff Sergeant William Bordelon, whose weathered face reflected the same grim assessment that every veteran of Guadalcanal and Tulagi carried when evaluating enemy fortifications. "They're expecting us to come straight up the beach," Hawkins said, his voice carrying the flat certainty of a man who had seen too many predictable assaults end with Marines floating face down in the surf. "Every gun in that complex is positioned to sweep the approaches from the lagoon." Bordelon nodded, studying the aerial photographs that showed the elaborate defensive network in stark black and white detail. "Standard doctrine says we establish a beachhead, bring up heavy weapons, and reduce the fortifications with naval gunfire and airstrikes." He paused, tracing the concrete bunkers with his finger. "That'll take days and cost us hundreds of casualties." If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The preparations around them continued with mechanical precision. Amtrak amphibious tractors bobbed in the morning swells, their crews running final checks on engines and weapons. The battleships Maryland and Colorado had already begun their preliminary bombardment, their 16-inch shells thundering across the water to pound the obvious landing zones on Betio's southern beaches where the main assault would take place. F-4F Wildcat fighters circled overhead, waiting for the signal to dive on their assigned targets. Everything was proceeding according to the standard amphibious assault playbook that had carried the Marines across the Pacific from the Solomon Islands to the Gilbert Archipelago. But Hawkins had spent 18 months watching Marines die following that same playbook, and he had developed an instinct for identifying the approaches that would get his men killed most efficiently. The Japanese had studied American tactics with the same meticulous attention they brought to everything else, and Rear Admiral Shibasaki had prepared his defenses accordingly. The obvious approach was always the most heavily defended. The northern shore, where Shibasaki's command bunker sat behind layers of concrete and steel, presented a different tactical picture. Intelligence photographs showed the same sophisticated fortifications, the same overlapping fields of fire, the same mathematical precision in defensive planning. But they also showed something else, a narrow corridor of dead ground created by the angle of the bunkers themselves, where attacking forces might advance under partial cover if they were willing to accept absolutely catastrophic casualties getting there. Corporal John Spillane approached the briefing group, his squad leaders trailing behind him. The veteran scout had survived enough reconnaissance missions to develop a sixth sense for terrain that would either save your life or end it. "Lieutenant, the men are asking about the landing plan," Spillane said. "They've seen those gun positions. They know what 470 Japs with prepared fields of fire can do to 35 Marines." Hawkins turned away from the island and looked at his assembled platoon. 35 men, the entire strength of the 2nd Marine Division's Scout Sniper platoon, against nearly 500 enemy defenders in reinforced positions. The mathematics were obscene. Military doctrine said you needed 3 attackers for every defender to overcome fortified positions. Hawkins had 1 attacker for every 13 defenders, and his mission was to knock out the Japanese command bunker before the main assault forces hit the southern beaches. "We're not going up the beach," Hawkins announced, his decision crystallizing as he spoke. The assembled scouts and snipers exchanged glances, recognizing the moment when their platoon leader was about to ignore every tactical manual written since the invention of machine guns. "We're going through the surf line on the northern shore. We're going to hit them before they even know we've landed." The audacity of the plan struck them immediately. A platoon-strength assault against battalion-strength defenses violated every principle of conventional warfare. The Japanese had 470 men in prepared positions. Hawkins had 35 Marines in Amtracs that would make them visible targets from the moment they left the transport ships. They would be attacking without heavy weapons support, without armor, without the concentrated firepower that made amphibious assaults survivable. But they would also be attacking 2 hours before the main landings, hitting a section of beach that the Japanese had prepared to defend but not expected to defend immediately. While Shibasaki's forces waited for the inevitable assault on the southern beaches, Hawkins's scouts would be coming ashore on the northern coast, moving through the one corridor of dead ground that Japanese defensive planning had inadvertently created. Bordelon studied the northern coastline through his own binoculars, calculating approach angles and fields of fire with the practiced eye of a man who had survived by understanding exactly where enemy bullets would travel. "The fortifications are just as heavy on the north shore," he observed. "If they spot us during the approach, we'll be slaughtered in the Amtracs before we even reach the beach." "They won't spot us," Hawkins interrupted. "The naval bombardment starts at 0500 hours. Every Japanese soldier on this island will be taking cover from 16-inch shells. We'll be in the water by 0530, using the bombardment as cover. By the time they realize we're not part of the main assault, we'll already be ashore and moving on their positions." He pointed to the narrow corridor of dead ground visible in the aerial photographs. "Intelligence shows a gap in their overlapping fields of fire right here. It's maybe 30 yards wide, created by the angle of their bunker construction. We punch through there, we can get behind their coastal defenses and roll up their positions from the flank." The plan violated every principle Hawkins had been taught at Marine Corps schools in Quantico. Marines were supposed to concentrate their forces, use overwhelming firepower to suppress enemy defenses, and advance under cover of naval gunfire and air support. Hawkins was proposing to split his tiny platoon, attack from an unexpected direction with no heavy weapons, and rely entirely on speed and surprise to overcome a defensive network that had been specifically designed to stop exactly this type of assault. It was also exactly the kind of unconventional thinking that might allow 35 Marines to accomplish what conventional tactics said required 350. Spillane's weathered face split into a slow grin as the implications became clear. We'll be behind them before they know we've landed. Exactly, Hawkins said. While they're watching for the main assault from the lagoon, we'll be coming through their back door. He turned to his squad leaders, the decision made. Check your men's equipment. Every Marine carries double ammunition load. Flamethrowers and demolition charges get priority. We're going to show Admiral Shibasaki what happens when you prepare for the last war instead of this one. The word spread quickly through the scout sniper platoon, carried by the kind of nervous energy that always preceded operations, where the survival odds looked worse on paper than they felt in your gut. These were not ordinary Marines. These were men who had been selected for reconnaissance and raiding operations, specifically because they possessed the combination of tactical skill and aggressive mindset necessary for missions that regular infantry would refuse. Private First Class Louis Micheloni checked his Browning automatic rifle for the third time, running through the weapon maintenance ritual that had kept him alive through Guadalcanal and Tulagi. The BAR gave him firepower that matched a Japanese light machine gun, making him the walking fire support for his squad. But it also made him a priority target for enemy gunners who understood that suppressing the BAR was essential to stopping Marine assaults. Corporal Spillane moved through his squad, checking ammunition loads, and ensuring that each Marine understood the mission essentials: speed and violence of action. Those were the two principles that would determine whether they survived the next 6 hours. The Japanese had numbers and prepared positions. The Marines had surprise and the kind of focused aggression that came from knowing you were outnumbered 13-1. The first Amtrak, loaded at 0500 hours precisely, its diesel engine coughing to life as Hawkins climbed aboard with the lead squad. The naval bombardment had already begun. Maryland's 16-inch guns delivering shells that screamed overhead to detonate among the coconut palms and concrete bunkers of southern Betio. The sound was apocalyptic, each shell creating a pressure wave that could be felt 3 miles offshore. Behind them, 19 more Amtraks carried the main assault waves of the 2nd Marine Division, preparing to hit the southern beaches in what would become one of the bloodiest amphibious assaults in Marine Corps history. But Hawkins and his 35 scouts were not part of that assault. They were the advance guard, the reconnaissance element that would knock out Japanese command and control before the main battle even began. From his position in the Japanese command bunker on Betio's northern shore, Commander Takeo Sugai pressed his eye to the periscope and scanned the lagoon approaches for signs of the expected American assault. The morning bombardment had intensified exactly as intelligence had predicted, with the heavy shells falling primarily on the southern beach defenses where Admiral Shibasaki had concentrated his strongest positions. The American attack would come from the lagoon. Every tactical analysis confirmed it. The southern beaches offered the shortest route to the island's airfield, the main strategic objective. The northern shore, where Sugai commanded 470 special naval landing forces, was a secondary defensive line, important but not immediately threatened. His men would provide supporting fire for the main defensive effort, but the real battle would be fought by the forces defending the obvious landing zones. The Type 96 light machine guns positioned in his bunker complex had been zeroed to sweep the northern beaches, their fields of fire carefully calculated to create overlapping kill zones that would slaughter any American forces attempting to land in this sector. But Sugai expected his weapons would spend the morning providing enfilading fire against Marines attacking the southern beaches, not defending against direct assault on his own positions. 2 miles offshore, Hawkins watched the naval bombardment walk across Betio's southern defenses, each explosion sending palm trees and coral debris flying into the morning air. The timing was perfect. Maryland and Colorado were delivering exactly the kind of concentrated fire support that would keep Japanese defenders underground, while his Amtraks made their approach to the northern beaches. The lead Amtrak commander, a Navy coxswain from Louisiana whose steady hands had delivered Marines to hostile beaches from Guadalcanal to Tarawa, adjusted his course to take advantage of the smoke and spray created by the naval bombardment. The Japanese would be looking south, watching for the main assault. They would not be expecting a platoon-strength force to hit them from the north while the battleships were still firing. Bordelon checked his flamethrower one final time, ensuring the fuel lines were clear and the ignition system functional. The portable flame weapon was a brutal tool, designed specifically for the kind of close-quarters bunker fighting that awaited them on Betio's beaches. Japanese defensive positions that could withstand hours of artillery bombardment would become death traps when jellied gasoline flooded their interior chambers. The first Amtrak ground onto the northern beach at 05:45 hours, exactly 15 minutes after the naval bombardment had driven Japanese defenders into their reinforced bunkers. Hawkins was the first Marine off the ramp, his Mona Garand rifle already searching for targets as he splashed through knee-deep water onto coral sand that crunched under his boots. The resistance was lighter than expected, scattered rifle fire from observation posts manned by soldiers who had been assigned to watch for diversionary attacks rather than repel a main assault. The Japanese positions along this stretch of coastline were just as heavily fortified as intelligence had indicated, but their defenders were still taking cover from the naval bombardment, waiting for the shelling to stop before manning their weapons. Spillane's squad hit the beach in the second Amtrak, moving with the practiced efficiency of men who had done this before and survived by doing it fast. The Japanese bunkers that dominated the northern shore were designed to fire seaward, their embrasures providing perfect fields of fire across the beaches and surf line. But their rear approaches were protected only by camouflage and a few riflemen who had expected to face isolated infiltrators, not an organized assault force. The first bunker fell within 3 minutes of the initial landing. Bordelon's flamethrower team approached from the blind side while covering fire from Michelones. BAR suppressed the firing slits. The portable flame weapon hissed as streams of jellied gasoline reached through the bunker's ventilation ports, filling the concrete chamber with superheated gases that made the position uninhabitable within seconds. When the steel door finally opened, 2 Japanese sailors stumbled out with their hands raised, their uniforms singed and their weapons abandoned in the inferno behind them. The bunker that had been designed to hold up an entire Marine company for hours had been neutralized by a 4-man team in less time than it took to call in artillery coordinates. Hawkins moved through the bunker complex with his radio man close behind, coordinating the assault with hand signals and whispered orders that kept his squads moving forward through the narrow corridor of dead ground his planning had identified. The Japanese defensive network was exactly as sophisticated as intelligence had indicated, but its creators had made one critical assumption. They had assumed American forces would attack from the expected direction. Commander Sugai heard the explosion of Bordelon's flamethrower and felt the first cold touch of doubt creep into his tactical assessment. That sound had come from behind his forward positions, from an area that should have been secure. His periscope showed nothing but smoke from the naval bombardment, but the radio chatter from his scattered observation posts told a different story. Americans were already ashore. Americans were already moving through positions that were supposed to be unassailable. The tactical situation that Sugai had spent 8 months preparing for had just been reversed in less than 10 minutes. Instead of providing supporting fire for the main defensive effort, his forces were now fighting for survival against an enemy who had appeared where no enemy should be. The silence that settled over Betio's northern shore at 10:30 hours on November 20th carried a weight that seemed to press against the consciousness of every Marine who had survived, the morning that changed everything. Second Lieutenant William Dean Hawkins stood among the wreckage of what had been Rear Admiral Shibasaki's northern defensive network, surveying concrete bunkers that had been reduced to smoking ruins and gun positions that would never again threaten American forces attempting to cross the coral beaches. The transformation was complete. A fortress that had taken 8 months to construct and fortify had been dismantled in less than 4 hours by Marines who had refused to attack it the way its builders had expected. Private First Class Michelini sat on the edge of a captured bunker, cleaning his Browning automatic rifle with the methodical precision that combat had taught him, but his hands moved automatically, while his mind struggled to process what he had witnessed and accomplished. The mathematical impossibility of 35 Marines defeating 470 Japanese defenders in prepared positions should have resulted in the complete destruction of Hawkins's platoon. Instead, they had achieved a tactical victory so complete that military analysts would spend decades trying to understand exactly how it had happened. Corporal Spillane walked among his squad, checking on wounded Marines and ensuring that ammunition and medical supplies were being distributed properly. 3 members of his demolition team had been hit during the assault on the communications bunker, their injuries serious but not fatal, thanks to the Navy corpsman who had landed with the platoon, specifically to provide immediate medical care. The young Marines who had executed textbook assaults against fortified positions now wore the same haunted expression that characterized veterans of Guadalcanal and Tulagi, the look of men who had discovered reserves of courage they had not known they possessed. Captain Robert McPherson, commander of the 2nd Marine Division's reconnaissance company, came ashore at 1100 hours to assess the situation that Hawkins had created. The captain had expected to find his scout sniper platoon pinned down on the beaches, fighting a desperate defensive action while waiting for reinforcement from the main assault forces. Instead, he found them occupying Japanese command bunkers, processing prisoners, and coordinating the destruction of defensive installations that conventional assault doctrine said should have required days of fighting to reduce. McPherson studied the tactical map that showed the extent of Hawkins's penetration into the Japanese defensive network, and understood immediately that he was looking at something historically significant. The scout sniper platoon had not simply accomplished their assigned mission of disrupting enemy command and control. They had fundamentally altered the tactical situation across the entire northern sector of Betio, eliminating defensive positions that could have inflicted catastrophic casualties on Marines advancing from the southern beaches. The main assault forces were already encountering the kind of resistance that had made Tarawa infamous in Marine Corps history. On the southern beaches, where conventional amphibious assault doctrine had concentrated the landing forces, Japanese defenders were inflicting terrible casualties on Marines, attempting to cross coral reefs that had prevented landing craft from reaching the shore. The water between the reef and the beach was becoming a killing field, with wounded Marines drowning in 3 feet of water, while Japanese machine gunners swept the approaches with methodical precision. But on the northern shore, where Hawkins had ignored conventional doctrine and attacked from an unexpected direction, American forces now controlled key terrain without having suffered the catastrophic casualties that traditional assault planning had predicted. The contrast between the two situations would influence Marine Corps tactical thinking for the remainder of the Pacific War and beyond. Staff Sergeant Bordelon received orders to move his flamethrower teams south to support the main assault forces, but first he supervised the final destruction of Japanese defensive positions in his sector. The concrete bunkers that had been designed to withstand 16-inch naval shells were collapsed with carefully placed demolition charges that brought tons of reinforced concrete crashing down on gun positions that would never again threaten American operations. The systematic demolition served notice that even the most sophisticated defensive engineering could be defeated by Marines who understood that fixed fortifications created their own vulnerabilities. Commander Sugai, now a prisoner in American hands, provided intelligence officers with detailed information about Japanese defensive planning that revealed the assumptions underlying Admiral Shibasaki's strategy. The Japanese had studied American amphibious assault tactics through 2 years of Pacific warfare and had concluded that marine operations followed predictable patterns: massive naval bombardment, airstrikes against prepared positions, frontal assaults supported by overwhelming firepower. The defences on Betio had been specifically designed to survive this conventional approach and inflict maximum casualties on attackers who followed the tactical manual. What Japanese planners had not anticipated was commanders like Hawkins who understood that the tactical manual was a guide, not a straitjacket. By attacking from an unexpected direction with minimal fire support, the lieutenant had negated every advantage that Sugai's defensive network possessed. The overlapping fields of fire became irrelevant when Marines approached from blind angles. The reinforced concrete walls provided no protection against flamethrowers attacking from the rear. The mathematical precision of defensive calculations meant nothing when the attackers changed the fundamental assumptions on which those calculations were based. Private First Class Sherwood participated in the grim task of counting enemy casualties in the sectors his squad had cleared. The number was staggering. 147 Japanese sailors had died defending positions in Sherwood's area of operations alone, most of them killed by flamethrowers and demolition charges rather than rifle fire. The efficiency of close assault tactics against fixed fortifications was evident in the casualty ratios, but it also revealed something about the nature of modern warfare that made conventional defensive planning increasingly obsolete. The technological advantages that fixed fortifications provided against artillery and small arms fire became liabilities when attackers used weapons specifically designed for bunker warfare. Japanese defensive positions that could survive hours of naval bombardment fell within minutes to flamethrower teams who understood the vulnerabilities that every concrete structure inevitably possessed. The lesson would influence military engineering for decades, but for the Marines fighting on Tarawa in November of 1943, it was simply the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. By 1300 hours, advanced elements of the main assault forces began reaching the northern shore, their arrival marking the complete collapse of organized Japanese resistance in this sector. The Marines, who had fought their way across the southern beaches, suffering terrible casualties in the process, found themselves advancing through terrain that Hawkins's platoon had already secured. The contrast between their experience and the scout sniper's assault would generate controversy in after-action reports, with some officers questioning why the entire landing force had not adopted Hawkins's unconventional approach. The answer lay in the nature of military planning and the inherent conservatism of organizations that had developed doctrine through decades of experience. Hawkins had been given freedom to improvise because his mission was reconnaissance and disruption, not the seizure of major objectives. His platoon was small enough and mobile enough to exploit opportunities that larger formations could not. Most importantly, he had been willing to accept risks that conventional planning considered unacceptable, gambling that speed and surprise would overcome numerical disadvantage. Lieutenant Colonel Evans Carlson, whose raider battalions had pioneered unconventional tactics in the Pacific, visited Hawkins's command post at 1400 hours to personally assess the tactical innovations that had proven so devastatingly effective. Carlson had built his reputation on exactly this kind of aggressive, unconventional warfare, and he recognized immediately that Hawkins had demonstrated principles that should reshape Marine Corps doctrine for small unit operations. The colonel examined the Japanese defensive positions that had been reduced with such efficiency and understood that fixed fortifications, no matter how sophisticated, created predictable patterns that innovative attackers could exploit. The Japanese had built their bunkers to resist expected threats, but in doing so had created vulnerabilities to unexpected attacks. The lesson applied to military planning at every level, from tactical operations to strategic defense. Hawkins received orders at 1500 hours to prepare his platoon for evacuation to the transport ships, but the lieutenant requested permission to remain ashore and support continued clearing operations. His Marines had developed an expertise in reducing Japanese fortifications that was proving valuable across the entire island, and Hawkins understood that sharing this tactical knowledge would save American lives in subsequent operations. The request was approved, and the Scout Sniper platoon spent the next 48 hours teaching other Marine units the techniques they had perfected during their assault on the northern defenses. Flamethrower employment, demolition charge placement, approach routes that exploited blind spots in bunker design. The lessons learned at such terrible cost were being disseminated to Marines who would carry them to Saipan, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. Private First Class Micheloni found himself instructing Marines from the 6th Regiment on the proper use of Browning automatic rifles for bunker suppression, sharing knowledge that had kept him alive through 4 hours of continuous combat against superior numbers. The young Marines he was teaching looked at him with a mixture of respect and disbelief when they learned that his squad had been part of a 35-man force that had destroyed a defensive network held by nearly 500 Japanese defenders. The psychological impact of Hawkins's victory extended throughout the 2nd Marine Division and beyond. Word spread quickly through the ranks that a single platoon had accomplished what conventional planning said required a battalion, and that they had done so by ignoring tactical doctrine and attacking from an unexpected direction. The story became legend almost immediately, the kind of narrative that transforms how soldiers think about impossible odds and mathematical disadvantages. Corporal Spillane participated in the identification and burial of Japanese casualties, a grim task that revealed the human cost of Sugai's defensive planning. The 470 sailors who had died defending Betio's northern shore had fought with courage and discipline, but their tactical situation had been hopeless from the moment Hawkins's Marines penetrated their defensive perimeter. The mathematical precision of overlapping fields of fire and pre-registered artillery coordinates had proven irrelevant against an enemy who refused to attack from expected directions. The systematic burial operations served both practical and moral purposes. Bodies left exposed in the tropical heat would create disease hazards for American forces occupying the island, but the Marines also understood that even enemy dead deserved the basic dignity of proper interment. The contrast between this treatment and the atrocities that Japanese forces had committed against Allied prisoners would become a defining characteristic of American military operations, demonstrating values that transcended the brutal necessities of combat. Staff Sergeant Bourdillon was killed on November 21st while assaulting a Japanese pillbox on the southern side of Betio, his death coming less than 24 hours after his flamethrower had proven so devastatingly effective against Sugai's northern defences. The loss struck Hawkins's platoon with particular force, removing one of the most experienced and effective combat leaders in the Scout Sniper Unit. Bourdillon's Medal of Honor citation would specifically mention his actions during the assault on the command bunker, recognizing the courage and tactical skill that had enabled 35 Marines to defeat a force 13 times their size. Second Lieutenant Hawkins himself was mortally wounded on November 21st while leading an assault against Japanese positions that were threatening the main American advance. The lieutenant, who had revolutionized small unit tactics at Tarawa, died doing exactly what he had trained his Marines to do, attacking fortified positions from unexpected angles with speed and violence of action. His Medal of Honor would be awarded posthumously, recognizing not just individual heroism, but the tactical innovations that had fundamentally changed how Marines approached bunker warfare. The deaths of Bourdillon and Hawkins within 24 hours of their greatest tactical victory revealed the brutal mathematics of Pacific War combat. Courage and tactical skill improved survival odds, but provided no guarantee against the random violence that characterized modern warfare. The techniques they had pioneered would save thousands of American lives in subsequent campaigns, but they themselves would not survive to see the innovations they had introduced become standard Marine Corps doctrine. Captain McPherson submitted his after-action report on November 23rd, documenting in careful detail the tactical sequence that had enabled the Scout Sniper platoon to achieve results that conventional planning said were impossible. The report would be studied at Marine Corps schools in Quantico and would influence tactical doctrine for amphibious operations throughout the remainder of the war and beyond. The fundamental lesson was simple but profound. Defensive perfection created its own vulnerabilities, and innovative attackers who understood those vulnerabilities could achieve decisive results with minimal forces. The strategic implications of the Northern Shore assault extended far beyond the immediate tactical situation on Betio. Japanese commanders throughout the Pacific had invested enormous resources in creating defensive networks based on the assumption that American forces would attack from predictable directions using conventional tactics. If those assumptions could be consistently proven wrong, the entire Japanese defensive strategy would require fundamental revision at a time when resources and manpower were already stretched beyond sustainable limits. Private First Class Michelini received evacuation orders on November 24th, his combat wounds requiring treatment beyond what could be provided on Betio. The young Marine who had provided crucial fire support during the assault on Sugai's command bunker departed the island with a Silver Star Medal and the knowledge that he had participated in one of the most tactically significant small unit actions in Marine Corps history. His evolution from a replacement fresh from training to a combat veteran whose tactical expertise was being taught to other Marines had occurred in less than 4 hours of fighting. The reconstruction of Betio began immediately after organized Japanese resistance ended, with Marine engineers and Seabees working to repair damage caused by the naval bombardment and to expand the airfield that would eventually support bombing operations against Japanese positions throughout the Central Pacific. The island that had cost so many American lives would become a strategic asset that contributed directly to the eventual defeat of Japan, but the price paid on those coral beaches would never be forgotten by the Marines who had fought there. Corporal Spillane returned to the United States in January of 1944, his combat service complete after accumulating enough points for rotation home. The demolition expert who had placed the charges that breached Sugai's command bunker carried with him knowledge and experience that would influence Marine Corps combat engineering for decades. His lectures at training facilities, from Camp Pendleton to Quantico, would teach thousands of Marines the techniques that had proven so effective against Japanese fortifications, disseminating tactical innovations that had been developed under fire on Betio's northern shore. The silence that finally settled over Tarawa in late November of 1943 carried the weight of 76 hours of some of the most intense combat in Marine Corps history. But within that larger narrative of sacrifice and strategic victory, the story of 35 Marines who had defeated 470 Japanese defenders in prepared positions stood out as something exceptional. Hawkins and his scout sniper platoon had demonstrated that tactical innovation and aggressive leadership could overcome mathematical disadvantages that conventional wisdom considered insurmountable. The lessons learned on Betio's northern shore would be carried forward to every subsequent amphibious operation in the Pacific War. Marines attacking fortified positions on Saipan, Tinian, Guam, Peleliu, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa would use the techniques that Hawkins had pioneered. Flamethrower teams would approach bunkers from blind angles. Demolition squads would exploit the vulnerabilities that fixed fortifications inevitably possessed. Small unit leaders would understand that defensive perfection created its own weaknesses that innovative attackers could exploit. The final tally of the engagement told a story in numbers that military analysts would study for generations. 470 Japanese naval infantry killed or captured, 15 Marines killed and 23 wounded, a ratio of more than 12-1 in favor of the defenders, yet the attackers had achieved complete tactical victory. The mathematics were impossible, according to conventional doctrine, but they had happened because one Marine lieutenant had understood that the tactical manual was a starting point, not a limitation. Private First Class Sherwood's marksmanship during the assault earned him recognition as one of the most effective scout snipers in the Pacific Theater, but his personal evolution from uncertain replacement to confident combat veteran represented something larger than individual achievement. The Marine Corps had developed a training system and tactical doctrine that could transform ordinary young Americans into extraordinarily effective combat soldiers in remarkably short periods. The institutional excellence that made this transformation possible was built on exactly the kind of innovative thinking that Hawkins had demonstrated on Betio's northern shore. The memorial services for Second Lieutenant William Dean Hawkins and Staff Sergeant William Bordelon were conducted aboard the transport ships that carried the 2nd Marine Division away from Tarawa in early December of 1943. The Marines who attended those services understood that they were honoring men who had not only displayed exceptional courage but had fundamentally changed how the Marine Corps approached bunker warfare. The tactical innovations they had pioneered would outlive them, saving American lives and contributing to ultimate victory in the Pacific. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now and don't forget to subscribe. The landing beaches of Betio would eventually be secured at terrible cost, with Marine casualties exceeding 3,000 killed and wounded during 76 hours of fighting. But the northern shore, where Hawkins's scout sniper platoon had attacked from an unexpected direction and destroyed a defensive network that should have been impregnable, stood as proof that tactical innovation could achieve results that conventional planning considered impossible. The perfect kill zone that Commander Sugai had designed had become a perfect example of how rigid defensive thinking could be defeated by flexible offensive execution. The narrow beaches where Japanese gunners had waited for Marines to attack from predictable directions now served as supply routes for American forces who had bypassed the kill zones entirely. The concrete bunkers that had been designed to withstand battleship bombardment lay in ruins, destroyed not by massive firepower but by small teams using weapons specifically designed for close assault. The overlapping fields of fire that should have created unbreakable defensive barriers had proven irrelevant against attackers who approached from angles that defensive planners had not adequately considered. In less than 4 hours, 35 United States Marines had proven that the most dangerous enemy of any defensive plan was an attacker who refused to behave as expected. The lesson would echo through military history long after the last veteran of Tarawa had passed away, a testament to the power of tactical innovation and aggressive leadership in overcoming impossible odds. The sun set over Betio on November 24, 1943, illuminating American positions that controlled every approach to the island. The perfect kill zone had been transformed into a perfect example of how tactical assumptions could be shattered by commanders willing to think beyond the limitations of conventional doctrine. And somewhere in the gathering darkness, the spirits of Hawkins and Bordelon and all the Marines who had fought on those bloody beaches could rest, knowing that their sacrifice had not been in vain and their innovations would save countless lives in the battles yet to come.